Hey class, this is the first lecture of week 1. We're going to look at we're going to briefly look at some of the big picture items when it comes to ethics and morality, right? So we're going to sort of start with this large framework. We'll pretty quickly narrow in on moral theories, excuse me, take a more detailed look at 3 in particular, but for now, I want to start sort of at a global perspective. So one of the key questions in philosophy, right, is what is the origin of morality? Where does it come from? We live in a moral universe. We seem to, moral judgments seem to be inescapable, right? Humans will make moral judgments. The question is, what kind of moral judgments will we make? It seems to be something universal, a part of human nature, that we are moral creatures that make moral judgments. There is not a single culture documented that does not include morality, systems of reward and punishment, social contracts like laws and other things. They all have something like morality. Well, why? Why is this a universal part of human nature? Where does it come from? How does this work, right? So we have 3 basic options. One is that morality originates from God, a divine being of some kind. Often the understanding is that God is by nature moral, good, loving, and from that nature, when God creates, some of that nature gets imparted onto creation, and so now we live in a moral universe. We are moral beings, and we're called to this moral law that sort of emanates from God or is commanded by God. It's also often argued, not always, but often, that if we follow the moral law, it naturally leads to a better life, healthy relationships, better self-esteem, more success, a better character, or maybe it is better because God will bless us as a result of following that law. But there's a clear connection right between God and morality. There are some religious folks who argue without God we couldn't be moral, right? You can't understand morality without God. But there is an alternate narrative, right? So there are some that suggest there is no God, and in fact, humans are the result of a long process of evolution. And if you think about early human existence, we're trying to survive, and that typically, it does mean that you have to utilize groups. If you have isolated humans competing for resources and you have groups of humans working together, the groups will survive and the isolated individuals will die. So we have learned to cooperate some, work together in groups, show kindness, share resources with others, typically kin, those we're related to, but also close in-group members, friends and whatnot. And the argument goes something like, as we try to compete, we try to find resources, procreate, protect ourselves from the weather, from animals, other things. Groups that created contracts with each other, like, hey, look, I won't steal from you and you don't steal from me. I won't kill you, you don't kill me. Those that form social contracts and followed them, punished those who didn't follow them, survive better. If you have groups that are selfish, stealing from one another, backbiting, killing each other, those groups will lose the competitive battle. The groups that cooperate and create those moral rules will survive. So human reason and survival is how morality begins. And that's why you get these fundamental laws in almost every culture. Don't steal, don't lie, don't kill or murder, right? Because those are necessary for survival. They help the groups thrive and flourish. So we create them. They're a human construction, right? They're not divinely constructed, but human construction. And over time, they get more complicated and sophisticated, and we end up with the constitutions and legal systems that you see in our current societies. But they start from this basic thing of agreements between humans and punishing people who don't follow. Another option is that human biology plays a role, that we're biologically equipped to make moral judgments, right, about certain things. And there's some evidence to suggest if something is universal the way morality is, that there might be a biological component to it, right? Now, there's nothing wrong with combining some of these. We might say God is the originator of morality, and certain fundamental laws, the Ten Commandments maybe, come from God directly. And then on top of God's morality, we construct our own independent, like some cultures say, don't eat with your elbows on the table, take your shoes off before you come in. What cheating looks like in one culture is different than another. So that on top of the divine law, humans have constructed other kinds of morality as well, right? And maybe those go together. And maybe we could argue, because we are created from God, God has in our very nature made us moral creatures biologically, given us a conscience, created the law, and some of morality is constructed by humans. So you might argue that all three of these work together. So you have various options. But one of the main things you'll have to decide, right, is morality grounded primarily in the divine? Is morality primarily a human construction, right? And that really matters. And it's not something we're going to talk a lot about in this class, but certainly it shapes some of the fundamental questions of ethics. So one question is, what is the origin of morality? And we have some options there. Another question is, what is the nature of morality? Is morality subjective? Is morality universal? What is the nature, right? And that's different than the origin. They relate to each other. If God is the ultimate origin of morality, then morality is probably going to be universal. If morality is primarily a human construction, then the nature of morality is probably going to be subjective based on what group you're a part of and what morality was constructed for you. So they go together, but they are separate questions. Here are some options regarding the nature of morality. Some suggest the nature of morality is radically subjective, moral subjectivism. And if you say morality is subjective, it has to be subjective to something, relative to something. In this case, morality is relative to the individual. Every individual is their own moral law, creates morality on their own. A common view of this is called emotivism, which says morality is really nothing more than my subjective judgments. I judge things immoral that I don't like or that tend to gross me out or that will cause me harm, and I tend to judge things as moral that I like or am drawn to. It's just my emotional states at the time. Not very many philosophers or ethicists hold to this view because it ultimately leads to chaos. You cannot solve moral problems because every individual is their own moral law. So if someone's stealing my car and I say, that's wrong, well, according to you it's wrong, but not to me, morality becomes like a preference. Like I go to 31 flavors and I'm like, I prefer chocolate chip. Someone else prefers pistachio. And there's no way to determine who's right and wrong. Well, if that's true of morality, then we can't really resolve moral conflict or disagreements, right? So that creates a problem. Another way of thinking about the nature of morality, one that's very popular and very common, is called ethical relativism. And now morality is relative, but not to the individual. It's relative to groups, cultures, religious traditions. So it's relative to a group, right? And the idea is here, typically, in this view, morality is a human construction. Various groups have constructed their morality. Individuals within those groups or societies should live under those moral constructions. Christians have constructed a morality. Buddhists have. The United States has a moral framework. Russia has its own. Various groups have various moral frameworks. This helps us solve problems because in the United States, if you steal my car, I can appeal to our group morality and the law that says stealing is wrong, the social contract that we've made, and you go to jail and I get my car back. It solves the problem. And it can be very helpful inside of groups. Some of the dominant features of ethical relativism are tolerance. So you do not judge out-group members. If you meet someone of a different moral tradition, you can't hold them accountable to your moral standards. You can only hold them accountable to their own moral standards. So if they're not a Christian, you can't judge them for not acting like a Christian because that's not their moral framework. You only can judge them based on their own moral code. So the idea is that I'll be tolerant of other groups and I'll seek to understand them better and affirm, right, that there is no universal morality. Morality is relative to the group. So my morality is only authoritative over me and my group. It's not over everyone, right? This is a common view for those that believe morality is constructed, because if it's constructed, how can it be universal? We already know there are different moral codes for different groups, so we have to sort of affirm each of them as being right and proper for them. But we still have some accountability, because I can't live any way I want. I have to live according to the moral standards set by my group. So as a Christian, I have a particular moral code that I'm supposed to live by. I just can't hold out-group members to that. One of the difficulties is that it doesn't help us with between-group conflict. So if Group A has a severe moral disagreement with Group B and they begin to have a conflict, there's no universal moral standards to appeal to say, oh, Group A is right and Group B is wrong, or Group B is right and Group A is wrong. There's no way to handle that, and so often it leads to violence. We actually see this in our world today. There is no global constitution, no global military, no global judges. So we can resolve conflicts within the United States by appealing to the Constitution, judges, right, elected leaders. But once the United States gets into a conflict with another nation, who can we appeal to? So it ends up being might makes right often. And so there's a problem, because we can't solve intergroup conflict as well with ethical relativism. This differs some. There's a term called cultural relativism. This is important, right? Cultural relativism is the view that different cultures have different moral frameworks. It's a descriptive claim only, describing something. Ethical relativism is a normative claim that says different groups have different morals, and it's a good thing. We should affirm it, uphold it as being morally right, to be tolerant of others. So what is purely descriptive, cultural relativism? Ethical relativism is more normative. The fourth way we might think of the nature of morality is soft universalism. And this is the idea that there are a handful of things that are universal, 4, 5, 6, 10, and they cut through culture. They apply to every human being. They are universal and objective, and if any person violates one of these universal moral rules or principles, we can judge them and say they're wrong. Anything outside of those universals, we appeal, as soft universalists, to ethical relativism. So if something that we're doing does not relate to the 4 universals, or 5 universals or whatever, then we appeal to, what does our culture say about this in terms of morality? What does my religion say in terms of morality? So it's universals in some ways on top of that ethical relativism. One of the primary, this is a very popular notion, right? It seems like murder should just be wrong for everyone. Killing for fun should just be wrong for everyone. Torture, genocide. So if we have a few universals, that's good, but then it allows us to have some flexibility as well. One of the primary questions is, where would the universals come from? Who decides what the universals are? And this is where a person might appeal to God as the origin of the universals, humans as the creators of the subjective elements of morality, and maybe we get a combination of the two views, right, in terms of what is the nature of morality. And then finally, you have hard universalism. And this is the view that all morality is black and white. For every moral dilemma, there is a right and wrong answer that is universal. When you have moral disagreements, it's not because things are relative, it's because some people are right and some people are wrong. And that's important to hear. Students often get confused and they say, well, there's moral disagreement, so doesn't it have to be relative? No. You can have 2 people who witnessed the accident, like a car accident, and they have 2 different perspectives. And we can say, if we have a video camera, like, oh, look, you were right and you were wrong. You disagreed. That didn't make it relative. It meant some of us have a better perspective than others. And with morality, it can be the same. We disagree morally. Maybe it is that some of us are right and some of us are wrong, and that things are truly universal in all areas. And so the hard universalist sort of takes that stance. Again, the question, where do these universals come from? Hard universalists tend to be more religious in nature and say the origin of all morality is from God, right? And so humans should try to stay out of morality as much as possible in terms of constructing it. So we've sort of got these various views, right? We have three options regarding the origin of morality: God, human construction, biology. When it comes to the nature of morality, is it objective, subjective, universal? We've got four options here: subjective to the individual, subjective to the group, soft universalism, hard universalism. I hope that this helps. You may have some questions. I'd be happy to try to answer. I'm basically going to have you, in the next assignment, reading reflection, look at a particular moral issue from these various views and sort of give some analysis in your own opinion. So I think it will be interesting and hopefully engaging. I'll look forward to seeing you guys all online.